Welcome back to the channel. These stories are meant for late nights, quiet rooms, and headphones on. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin the first story. I was 8 years old the first time I understood what real fear felt like. Not the kind you get from scary movies or schoolyard dares. Not the quick jolt of adrenaline that fades once the lights come back on. This was something heavier. Something that settled into my bones and stayed there long after the night was over. Even now, decades later, I remember it with a clarity that doesn't make sense. Most memories from that age blur together. Faces fade, details slip, but this one remains sharp. Preserved in perfect focus, like my mind refuses to let it soften. It was a Wednesday. I know that because I had spelling homework due the next day, and I remember being annoyed about it. The rain had started early that morning and never let up. By the time school ended, it was coming down hard enough to drown out the sound of traffic. The sky was a flat, angry gray, and water streamed down the windows like the building was slowly sinking. My parents picked me up instead of letting me walk home, which already felt unusual. On the drive, they talked about an event they had planned that evening, some kind of formal gathering downtown. I didn't pay much attention. Adult conversations always blended into background noise. What mattered to me was what came next. They weren't coming home right away. At first, they said they would, just a couple of hours. I'd be asleep by the time they got back. But as the storm worsened, their tone changed. Wind rocked the car at stoplights. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Branches littered the roads. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my mom was already on her phone, her voice tight as she spoke to someone on the other end. That was when they told me. They were staying at a friend's place near the venue. The roads were flooding, visibility was bad, driving later would be dangerous. They promised they'd come back first thing in the morning. I remember nodding and trying to look calm, even though my stomach twisted in a way I didn't fully understand yet. I didn't want to be the kid who panicked. I wanted them to trust me. "I'll be fine," I said, probably too quickly. "I can handle it." My dad smiled, but my mom didn't look convinced. Before they left, she crouched down in front of me and went over a list. Slowly, carefully. Lock every door, check the windows, close the blinds, leave a light on downstairs. She made me repeat it back to her. At the time, it felt unnecessary. Our neighborhood was quiet, boring even, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Crime was something you saw on TV, not something that wandered into real life. When their car disappeared down the street, I felt a rush of excitement that drowned out any lingering worry. I was home alone. No bedtime, no rules, no one telling me to turn the volume down. I dumped a bag of candy into a bowl, grabbed a blanket, and curled up on the living room couch. The rain hammered the roof so loudly, it felt like the house was being drummed on from above. I turned the TV up to compensate, flipping between cartoons, sugar buzzing through my veins. I remember telling myself I'd do my mom's checklist later, right before bed. There was plenty of time. There wasn't. At some point, the noise from the TV faded into nothing. My body gave up without warning, the candy bowl sliding onto the carpet as I slumped sideways and fell asleep. When I woke, the room was dark. The TV screen was black, reflecting my own confused face back at me. The house felt different somehow. Quieter, but not peaceful. Heavy. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It wasn't normal nighttime cold. It felt sharp, like the warmth had been pulled out of the air entirely. I sat up and wrapped the blanket tighter around myself, my teeth chattering softly. That's when I remembered the checklist. Panic rushed in all at once. I hadn't locked anything. The doors, the windows, the blinds were still open, leaving the house exposed to the storm and whatever else might be out there. I slid off the couch, my bare feet touching the cold floor, and moved through the house room by room. The front door clicked locked, the back door followed. I checked the windows, pressing my palms against the glass to make sure they were sealed. I pulled the blinds shut, the slats rattling faintly in the wind. Everything looked fine, but the cold didn't go away. I told myself the heater must have shut off. Maybe the storm knocked something loose. That explanation was enough to keep my fear manageable. I flipped on the hallway light like my mom had asked and headed upstairs to my room. That was when I truly heard the storm. My bedroom window faced the backyard, open space beyond it where the wind had nothing to break against. Rain slammed into the glass in violent sheets. Every flash of lightning turned the room white for a split second, followed almost immediately by thunder so loud it shook the walls. I lay down and pulled the covers up to my chin, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my breathing. Then I heard something else. At first, I thought it was the house settling. Old houses creak, I knew that even then. But this sound had rhythm. A soft shift, a pause, another shift, like weight being moved slowly, carefully. My room was carpeted, thick carpet. You couldn't hear footsteps on it. The sound came again. My eyes drifted toward the closet. The door was open, just a few inches. I froze. I knew for a fact I had closed it earlier. I always did. I hated sleeping with it open. It made my skin crawl. Lightning flashed, illuminating the dark gap inside the closet. Nothing moved, nothing visible, but the sound came again, closer. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure it would give it away. I slid out of bed and crossed the room as quietly as I could, every step feeling dangerously loud. I reached the door, pulled it open, and stepped into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran, down the stairs, past the kitchen, into the dining room. I ducked under the table and dragged a chair in front of me, creating a small pocket of shadow. That's when I started to cry. Silently, desperately, my hands clamped over my mouth as my body shook. And then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not steady, not normal. They were uneven, heavy, like someone struggling to walk properly. Each step sent a jolt of terror through me. They reached the bottom of the stairs. I squeezed my eyes shut. Something clattered onto the floor nearby, metal on wood. I opened my eyes just enough to see it. A tool, heavy, worn, and beyond it, just within my field of vision, a pair of legs, dirty, wet, marked with deep cuts and streaked with mud. They stood there, swaying slightly, waiting. I don't know how long I stayed frozen under that table. Time didn't move the way it usually does. It stretched and warped, seconds expanding into something unrecognizable. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears so loudly I was convinced it could be heard across the room. The legs didn't move at first. They just stood there, swaying slightly, as if whoever they belonged to was listening, waiting for something. Maybe for me to cry. Maybe for a sound to give me away. I pressed my forehead against my knees and focused on breathing as quietly as I could. In through my nose, out through my mouth. Slow, controlled, like my mom had taught me whenever I got nervous before school presentations. The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling overhead, rain battering the house. It felt unreal that something so violent could be happening both inside and outside at the same time. The person shifted their weight. The movement was subtle, but enough to make my stomach drop. One foot dragged slightly across the hardwood, leaving behind a wet streak that glistened faintly in the low light. Mud, rainwater, something darker mixed in that I didn't want to think about. Then they bent down. I saw their knees flex, saw the muscles tighten beneath their skin. My entire body screamed at me not to breathe, not to blink, not to exist. If they leaned just a little further, they would see me. I was sure of it. But they didn't. They paused halfway, frozen in that crouched position as if reconsidering. I could hear their breathing now, shallow, even, a faint rasp like air moving through a throat that wasn't quite working right. Slowly, they straightened back up. Relief hit me so hard it almost made me gasp, but I swallowed it down, biting into my lip until I tasted blood. The legs turned away from me and moved toward the living room. Each step was heavy, clumsy, not drunk exactly, but uncoordinated, as if walking itself required concentration. I listened as drawers were pulled open, cabinets, the scrape of something being dragged across the floor, a chair shifting. They were searching. The realization settled over me like ice. They weren't just passing through. They hadn't wandered in by accident. They were looking for something, or someone. I pressed myself tighter into the shadows, silently begging for them to leave, for the front door to open, for the nightmare to end. Minutes passed, maybe more. The sounds grew quieter, more distant. The searching slowed, then stopped entirely. Silence crept back into the house, thick and oppressive. I waited. My legs cramped. My neck ached from holding it at an awkward angle. Still, I didn't move. Every instinct told me not to. Then I heard it. The front door. The unmistakable creak of its hinges as it opened, followed by the rush of wind and rain spilling inside. A moment later, it closed again with a dull thud. Footsteps moved across the porch, and then there was nothing. No movement, no breathing, just the storm and the hum of the house settling back into itself. I stayed under the table long after logic told me it was safe. Fear had wrapped itself around me too tightly to let go easily. I counted in my head, numbers slipping and repeating, anything to keep myself grounded. Eventually, my muscles betrayed me. I had to move. Slowly, painfully, I crawled out from under the table. The room felt too open, too exposed. I half expected the figure to reappear from a doorway, legs wobbling back into view. But the house was empty. The wrench lay exactly where it had fallen, catching the light from the hallway. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. It was heavier than I expected, solid and cold in my trembling hands. I locked the front door again. This time, I double-checked it. Then I checked it again. I walked through the house, turning on every light as I went. Kitchen, living room, hallway, bathroom. Each illuminated space felt like a small victory against the darkness. When I reached the stairs, my gaze drifted upward toward my bedroom. I didn't want to go back up there. The thought of that closet door made my chest tighten. But I didn't have another choice. I couldn't stay downstairs forever. With the wrench clutched against my chest like a lifeline, I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. The storm had begun to ease outside, the rain softening into a steady drizzle. My bedroom door was still open. The closet door was still ajar. Nothing looked disturbed. My bed was untouched. My toys sat neatly where I'd left them. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I crossed the room and slammed the closet door shut, twisting the handle until it clicked. Then I dragged my dresser in front of it, the wood scraping loudly across the carpet. Only then did I crawl back into bed. I hid the wrench in my nightstand drawer, wrapping it in a shirt so it wouldn't clatter if I moved. My hands shook so badly I struggled to pull the blanket over me. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound made me flinch. Every gust of wind against the window felt like footsteps. But exhaustion eventually won. Somewhere between fear and dawn, I drifted off. Morning light woke me. Sunshine streamed through the blinds, bright and cheerful, completely at odds with the memory of the night before. Birds chirped outside. The storm was gone. leaving behind nothing but damp pavement and puddles that reflected the sky. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream. Then I remembered the wrench. I pulled it from the drawer and stared at it, proof that the night was real, that someone had been in my house. When my parents came home later that morning, I ran to them, clinging tighter than I ever had before. They asked why I was so shaken. I didn't know how to explain it. The words tangled in my throat. I told them someone was in the house. They exchanged looks, concerned but skeptical. They checked the doors, the windows. Everything was locked. Nothing was missing. No signs of a break-in. I didn't mention the legs, or the cuts, or the way they'd swayed like something wasn't quite right. Not yet. Years passed before I told the full story. By then, I was older, old enough to understand why my parents had dismissed it at first. How strange it must have sounded. A child alone in a storm, imagination running wild. But I knew what I saw. I still do. We never found out who it was. No reports of a break-in in the area. No neighbors who noticed anything unusual. The storm had washed away any footprints that might have existed. Sometimes I wonder if the wrench saved me, if the sound of it hitting the floor made them hesitate just long enough to leave. Other times, I wonder why they didn't find me, why they didn't look under the table, why they walked away at all. Those questions have followed me into adulthood. Even now, when rain pounds against my windows late at night, I feel that same bone-deep cold settle into my chest. I check my locks. I close my closet door. And I keep that wrench, just in case. I was 15 when it happened. Old enough to know better than to put myself in danger, but still young enough to believe the world followed certain rules. That bad things happened to careless people or people who ignored warning signs. That if you stayed in familiar places and trusted your instincts, you'd be fine. I learned that night how wrong I was. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Fort Collins, Colorado. The kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset and parents waved at each other from their driveways. Crime was something you heard about on the news, something that happened somewhere else. Our house backed up against a massive public park, nearly a mile of open green space, walking paths and trees that stretched farther than you could see from the road. The park was always lit at night. Tall lampposts lined the paths, casting warm yellow pools of light on the pavement. Joggers came through early mornings, dog walkers passed through in the evenings. It never felt unsafe, not once. That mattered to my parents because I wasn't exactly an easy kid. I had panic attacks, real ones, the kind that made my hands go numb and my chest feel like it was collapsing in on itself. I fainted easily if I got too overwhelmed. Loud noises made it worse. Crowded rooms made it worse. Even small things could spiral if I wasn't careful. Sleep was another issue. I couldn't fall asleep with background noise. Not a fan, not music, not rain, especially not rain. The sound of it tapping on the roof felt like someone drumming directly inside my skull. Most nights, I lay awake long after my parents had gone to bed, staring at the ceiling and counting my breaths. Because of that, my parents encouraged me to take short walks when I couldn't sleep. Nothing far, just enough to burn off the nervous energy and clear my head. Our neighborhood looped around the park, and the main path was visible from several houses. They trusted it. I trusted it too. The night it happened was a Saturday in late May, right before the school year ended. Finals were over, summer was close enough to taste. The rain started in the early evening and never let up. It wasn't a thunderstorm, no lightning, no dramatic crashes, just a steady, heavy rain that soaked everything and amplified every sound. By midnight, I still hadn't slept. I paced my room, read the same paragraph of a book over and over without absorbing it. Eventually, I gave up. My chest felt tight, my thoughts buzzing like static. So, I put on my rain jacket and slipped out the front door. I didn't bring my phone. That was intentional. Screens made my anxiety worse, and I didn't want the temptation. I didn't bring an umbrella either. I liked the way the rain felt against my skin. Grounding. Real. The street was empty. Streetlights reflected off wet asphalt, stretching into long, glowing streaks. The park entrance was only 2 blocks away, its path glowing softly beneath the lamps. As soon as I stepped onto the trail, my shoulders relaxed. The rain muffled everything. No cars, no voices, just the steady rhythm of water hitting leaves and pavement. My breathing slowed, my thoughts settled. I walked for about 20 minutes, following the curve of the path through the park. Trees loomed on either side, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The air smelled clean, damp, almost sweet. I started to feel sleepy. That's when I decided to head back. I was cutting across a stretch of road that bordered the far edge of the park when I saw something ahead of me. At first, I thought it was trash. A dark shape lying in the middle of the street, soaked and unmoving. A bag? Maybe debris washed into the road by the rain? But as I got closer, the shape resolved into something else entirely. A person. They were lying face down in the road, arms tucked beneath their body, legs slightly bent, completely still. I stopped walking. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, to go home, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. The scene felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. But another thought followed close behind. What if they were hurt? What if they'd been hit by a car and left there? I stood there, frozen, rain dripping from my hood, my heart hammering in my chest. Then I took a step closer. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely louder than the rain. No response. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. Not physically colder, but heavier. Like the space around me had thickened. I could see their clothes now. A dark plaid shirt clinging to their back, black pants soaked through, shoes still on. They hadn't moved. I was maybe 10 feet away when I heard it. A sound from behind me. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the rain like a blade. A sharp, distorted scream, not quite human, not quite animal. It echoed from deeper inside the park, bouncing between the trees. I spun around, heart jumping into my throat. Nothing. The path behind me was empty. The trees stood still, dripping rain. The lampposts hummed softly. No movement, no figures. The sound hadn't come from the road. It had come from the park. I told myself it was an animal, an owl, a fox, something startled by the storm. But even as I turned back towards the road, that explanation didn't sit right. Because the man was sitting up. He hadn't been a moment ago. Now he sat upright in the middle of the street, legs folded beneath him, hands resting calmly in his lap. He was staring directly at me. I froze. My vision tunneled. The world narrowed until it was just him and me and the rain between us. His face was pale, almost gray under the streetlight. Water streamed down his features, but his eyes never blinked. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, pulling at the corners of his mouth in a way that felt forced, wrong. He stood up, and then he ran. Straight at me. The shock snapped me out of place. I turned and bolted, slipping on the wet pavement as I ran back towards the park. Behind me, his footsteps slapped against the road, fast and uneven. "I'll kill you," he screamed. The words sliced through the rain, raw and full of intent. I veered off the path and into the trees, branches whipping against my arms and face. Mud sucked at my shoes, threatening to pull them off. My lungs burned, my chest tightened, panic clawing its way up my throat. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran until my legs screamed and my vision blurred, until I reached the densest part of the park and ducked behind a tree, pressing my back against the bark and forcing myself to stay silent. I listened. Rain, wind, my own ragged breathing. No footsteps, no voice. I waited there, soaked and shaking for what felt like hours. When I finally moved again, I took the longest route home possible, circling the park instead of cutting through it. I didn't see him again, but I knew deep down that whatever I'd encountered that night wasn't over. And I was right. I didn't sleep that night. I stood in the shower until the water ran cold, scrubbing my skin raw as if I could wash the memory off me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. That smile. The way he ran at me without hesitation, like he already knew how it would end. When morning finally came, I told myself it had been a misunderstanding. A drunk man, a mentally ill person wandering near the park. A bad coincidence amplified by exhaustion and anxiety. I repeated those explanations like a mantra while I ate breakfast, while my parents chatted about groceries and weekend plans. I didn't tell them. I should have, but fear has a way of making you quiet, and a part of me worried they wouldn't let me walk at night anymore. Those walks were my only escape, so I stayed silent. For a week, I avoided the park entirely. I stuck to the sidewalks near our house. I kept my phone on me. I went to bed earlier. Everything felt fine, normal, until Friday night. It was just after 10 when I heard something outside my bedroom window. A sound so faint I almost ignored it. Top, top, top. Not rain, the sky was clear. I sat up in bed, heart instantly racing. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, like someone tapping a fingernail against glass. My bedroom was on the second floor. The only thing outside my window was the side yard and a tall maple tree whose branches brushed against the house. I told myself it was the tree. Then I heard breathing, right outside the glass. Shallow, wet, too close. I didn't move. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to look, but fear pinned me in place. The tapping stopped. The breathing continued. Then softly, a voice. I know you're awake. It was hoarse, ragged, the same voice that had screamed at me in the rain. My blood turned to ice. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, staying below the window. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip my phone as I dialed 911. Before I could press call, something scraped against the window. A slow, dragging sound. I heard the window latch rattle. That's when I screamed. The house exploded into motion. Lights snapped on. My parents burst into my room as the sound outside vanished. By the time my dad threw open the window and looked out, there was nothing there. No footprints. No broken branches. No one. The police came anyway. They searched the yard, the park, the surrounding streets. They took my statement seriously. Maybe too seriously. I watched their faces change as I described the man in the road, the chase, the voice outside my window. One officer asked a question that made my stomach drop. Did you notice his shoes? I nodded. Yeah, black sneakers, worn down on the sides. He exchanged a look with his partner. They didn't explain why. That night, my parents insisted I sleep in their room. I didn't argue. The next morning, my mom kept glancing out the windows. My dad stayed unusually quiet. By afternoon, the police returned. They told us they had reason to believe someone had been using the park at night, someone with a history of violent behavior, someone recently released from a psychiatric facility 2 towns over. They didn't say his name. They said he was known to fixate, to follow, to wait. They told us to stay alert and call immediately if we saw anything unusual. That night, I dreamed of running. I woke up screaming. 3 days passed without incident. On the 4th night, the power went out. It was just after midnight when the lights flickered and died. The house plunged into darkness, followed by the sudden, suffocating silence of appliances shutting down. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Inside the house. Slow. Heavy. Unfamiliar. They moved down the hallway, stopping outside my bedroom door. My doorknob turned. It didn't open. A pause, then a whisper through the crack beneath the door. You shouldn't have run. I screamed again, louder than before. My dad tackled the door from the inside as something slammed against it from the other side. Wood cracked, Hinges groaned. My mom was already on the phone with the police. The door burst inward. He stood there, soaked despite the dry night, eyes wild, mouth stretched into that same awful smile. I don't remember everything clearly after that. I remember my dad lunging at him. I remember shouting. I remember the sound of glass shattering as my mom hit him with a lamp. He went down. Sirens wailed in the distance. He laughed. Even as the police dragged him away, even as he screamed and thrashed, he laughed like he'd won something. Later, they told us he'd been living in the park for months, sleeping under bridges, watching houses, watching people. They found a notebook on him, pages and pages filled with writing. My name was written over and over again. I didn't go back to the park after that. We moved 6 months later. I'm older now, calmer. The panic attacks are rare. I sleep better. But sometimes late at night when it's quiet and still, I hear tapping on the glass, and I never check the window. I used to think nothing ever happened in storage facilities. They're places people forget about. Long rows of metal doors, concrete floors, buzzing lights that never quite work right. You rent a unit, you lock it, and whatever you put inside disappears from your life. That's the whole point. I learned the hard way that some things don't stay put. I worked nights at a self-storage facility just off the highway. Graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most people don't even realize those places have overnight staff, but insurance requires it. Someone to monitor cameras, log activity, and call police if alarms go off. It was boring work, exactly what I wanted. I sat in a small office near the front gate, watched grainy security feeds, and filled out paperwork while the building hummed around me. The only sounds were the air conditioner, the distant whine of traffic, and the occasional bang of metal as the building settled. I liked the quiet. On my first night, the manager gave me a short list of rules. Don't let anyone tailgate through the gate. Don't open units for customers outside business hours. And if you hear noises from inside the units, don't investigate alone. That last one caught my attention. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged and said people forget things. Old radios, faulty toys. Storage units are like time capsules. Sometimes they make noise. He smiled when he said it, but it didn't reach his eyes. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. Cars came and went. Cameras stayed quiet. Alarms never tripped. I settled into the rhythm of the job. Until Unit C17. It was at the far end of the facility, tucked against the back fence where the lights were dimmer and the cameras had blind spots. That unit never showed any activity on the logs. No recent access, no payment issues. It had been rented long-term, paid automatically. Around 2:30 a.m. one night, I heard a sound. A dull thump. It echoed faintly through the concrete halls, soft enough that I wondered if I had imagined it. I checked the monitors. Nothing. No movement, no alarms. A few minutes later, it happened again. Thump. This time, it came from the direction of Building C. I stood up and listened. Silence. I told myself it was the building settling. Temperature changes could do that. Old structures made noises all the time. Then I heard scraping. Slow, dragging, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. My stomach tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and stepped out of the office. The air inside the building felt colder than usual. The overhead lights flickered as I walked, casting long shadows between the rows of units. The sound led me deeper into Building C. I stopped near C17. The noise stopped too. I stood there, listening, heart thudding in my ears. The metal door was shut, padlock intact. No sign of tampering, no movement. I almost laughed at myself. Then, something hit the door from the inside. Not hard enough to dent it, just enough to make it shudder. I jumped back, flashlight shaking in my hand. There was no alarm. That was the part that bothered me most. If someone was inside the unit, the motion sensor should have triggered. It hadn't. I radioed the office. Control, this is night staff. I'm at Building C. Possible disturbance. Static crackled back. No response. I tried again. Nothing. The facility felt suddenly very large and very empty. I backed away from the unit, keeping my light trained on the door. For a moment, nothing happened. I convinced myself I'd spooked a raccoon or something equally harmless. Then a voice spoke from inside the unit. Soft, muffled. "Hello?" it asked. My brain scrambled for explanations. A trapped customer, someone who'd broken in and gotten stuck. A prank. I stepped closer, pulse racing. "Who is this?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, quieter. "Please don't leave." Every instinct told me to get out, to go back to the office, call the police, and let them handle it. But the voice sounded scared, desperate. "I work here," I said. "Are you locked inside?" Another pause. "Yes." I looked at the lock again. It was old but solid, no scratches, no sign it had been touched. "How long have you been in there?" I asked. The answer came after a long delay. "I don't know." That should have been my breaking point. People know how long they've been trapped, even roughly. I swallowed. "All right," I said. "I'm going to get help. Don't touch the door." "No," the voice said quickly, too quickly. "Please, just open it." I backed away. "I can't do that. I need authorization." The silence stretched. Then the voice changed. It didn't sound scared anymore. "I heard you walking every night. You sit in the office. You drink coffee at the same times. You check the cameras in the same order." My mouth went dry. "You don't talk much," it continued, "but you hum sometimes when you think no one's listening." I backed away until my shoulders hit the opposite row of units. "How do you know that?" I whispered. The answer came with a soft thump against the door. "I've been listening." I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I slammed the office door behind me and locked it. My hands shook as I called the police, stumbling over my words as I tried to explain. They arrived quickly, faster than I expected. 2 officers walked with me back to Building C. My heart hammered as we approached the unit. C-17 was quiet. No movement, no sound. One of the officers knocked on the door. "Police," he called. "If anyone's inside, make yourself known." Silence. They cut the lock. When the door rolled up, there was nothing inside. No person, no furniture, no boxes. Just a bare concrete floor and scrape marks leading from the back wall to the door. The officer frowned. "Are you sure this is the unit?" I nodded. They searched the entire facility, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints. They suggested stress, fatigue, auditory hallucinations. I finished my shift in silence. The next night, I didn't want to go back, but I needed the money. At 2:30 a.m., on the dot, the sound returned. Thump. From Building C. From C-17. And this time, the camera showed movement. The camera shouldn't have shown anything. That was the first thought that went through my head when I leaned forward in my chair and stared at the monitor. I had rewound the footage twice already, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But there it was, Unit C-17. The grainy black and white feed showed the metal door shuddering inward, just slightly, as if someone inside had leaned their weight against it. No alarm, no system notification, just movement where there shouldn't have been any. I checked the timestamp. 2:30 a.m. Exactly. I felt that same cold tightness settle in my chest. The same time as the night before. Same unit, same sound. Only now I could see it. I hovered my hand over the radio, then stopped. The police had already written it off. My manager had brushed it aside earlier that day when I called him, irritated that I'd overreacted and wasted his time. Probably squatters messing with you, or your imagination. You want more hours, don't you? I needed the job, so I stayed. I grabbed the flashlight again, slower this time, more deliberate. I didn't want to spook whatever was happening, or maybe I didn't want it to notice me. The walk to Building C felt longer than before. The overhead lights buzzed louder, flickering in irregular patterns. Shadows pooled between the units, stretching and shrinking as I moved. The closer I got to C-17, the stronger the smell became. It reminded me of damp concrete at first, then something sour layered underneath it, like old water left standing too long. I stopped a few feet from the door. "Hello?" I called out, hating how small my voice sounded. Nothing. The camera feed on my phone still showed faint movement, a sheep shifting behind the door, not clear enough to define, just a darker smear against the metal. I stepped closer. The door shuddered again. This time it was accompanied by a sound. Not a thump, not scraping. Breathing. Slow, labored, like someone trying not to be heard. I took a step back. "I already called the police," I lied. "They're on their way." The breathing stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over, that maybe I'd scared whoever it was into freezing. Then the voice came again. "You know," it said. "They came last night." My skin prickled. "How do you know that?" I asked. A pause. "They always come when someone gets too curious." The word "always" echoed in my head. "You shouldn't be here," the voice continued. "You stay longer than the others." My grip tightened on the flashlight. "What do you mean, others?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "The ones before you." The air felt heavier, pressed in around me. I forced myself to sound steady. "Listen, if someone locked you in there, we can get help, but you need to tell me who you are." The door creaked. Not opening, just flexing. "I don't remember my name," the voice said quietly. "I remember the lock." I stumbled back another step. "That's not funny," I said. "It's not laughing." Something dragged across the inside of the door, slow and deliberate, like fingertips tracing metal. You ever notice how these units all look the same? No windows, no clocks, no way to tell day from night. My heart pounded. They tell you it's for storage, but some things don't belong in the open. A sharp bang hit the door, hard enough for me to flinch. I turned and ran. I didn't slow down until I reached the office and slammed the door shut. I locked it, turned off the lights, and crouched behind the desk, listening. The monitors flickered. Every camera feed looked normal, except one, C-17. The door was open. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. The unit was empty like before, bare concrete, no person, no boxes. Then something moved at the back of the unit. Not forward, up. A shadow peeled itself away from the wall, stretching unnaturally as it slid across the ceiling. It didn't have a clear shape, just angles and bends where there shouldn't have been any. The camera cut to static. Every feed went dead at once. The lights in the office flickered, then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. I heard footsteps. Not inside the office, outside. Slow, unhurried, coming down the hallway. I held my breath, praying the lock would hold. The handle rattled. Once, twice, then stopped. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, counting my breaths, listening to the hum of the building slowly come back online. The lights flickered back on. The monitors rebooted one by one. Every feed was normal. Too normal. At 6 a.m., my relief was so intense it almost hurt. Day staff arrived, chatting casually, oblivious. I didn't tell them anything. I just grabbed my things and left. I didn't come back that night, or the next. I quit by email, citing personal reasons. My manager didn't argue. He didn't even ask for details. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past the facility in daylight. Everything looked harmless, clean, ordinary. But something was different. Building C was sealed off. Yellow tape, temporary fencing, a sign posted at the entrance, closed for maintenance. I parked across the street and watched. After a while, a maintenance truck pulled in. 2 men got out. They didn't look like contractors. They wore plain clothes, no logos. They went straight to C-17. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw one of them hesitate before unlocking the unit, saw the other glance nervously. When the door rolled up, both men stepped back. One of them gagged. They worked quickly, rolled something heavy out on a dolly covered with a tarp. It sagged in the middle, bending in a way that made my stomach turn. They loaded it into the truck and drove away. The unit was sealed shut again. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Just checking in," a calm voice said. "You used to work nights at the storage facility." My mouth dried up. "Yes," I said carefully. "Did you notice anything unusual during your time there?" I thought about the voice, the breathing, the way it knew my habits. "No," I said. "Nothing." There was a pause. "Good," the voice replied. "Some places are better left alone." The line went dead. I moved shortly after that. New city, new job, normal hours, no night shifts. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about Unit C-17, about how long it was paid for, about how many people heard the noises and walked away, how many stayed, and whether the thing inside was ever really locked in, or just waiting for someone who listened too long.